You wouldn't believe how something as simple as a wall could change everything. The smell of fresh concrete lingered in the air as I stood back and admired my work. It wasn't the most beautiful flood wall you'd ever seen, but it was mine. Solid, reliable, and, most importantly, necessary. I had spent weeks building it, a temporary solution for the seasonal floods that would inevitably come. But there was something about it that made people uncomfortable. The HOA, led by Carolyn Wright, had taken one look at it and decided to make me the butt of their jokes. It's an eyesore, they said, a wall that doesn't belong in a nice neighborhood like ours. I had heard the whispers, the snickers behind my back, but I wasn't bothered. In fact, I had an idea. I had made sure that wall wasn't just a barrier against water. It was my trump card, and the HOA didn't know it yet, but it was about to play a huge role in their downfall. My name is John Mitchell. I'm a proud homeowner in Willowbrook Estates, a quiet little neighborhood on the outskirts of Texas. I've worked hard to get where I am, and my land is important to me. But there's something about these suburban homeowners associations. They think they own the place. Carolyn Wright is the perfect example of that. She's been the president of the HOA for years, and I don't think she's ever met a rule she didn't want to enforce, unless, of course, it applied to her. For some reason, my flood wall got under her skin. Maybe it was the way it looked, a little too rough, not the manicured, cookie-cutter aesthetic she so loved. Maybe it was because I had built it myself. I don't know, but Carolyn wasn't having it. I'd always known that living under the thumb of the HOA wouldn't be easy. There are rules for everything. What kind of mailbox you can have, how tall your grass should be, whether or not your garage door should be open. But this was different. This was personal. I wasn't about to let her bully me over something that I knew was practical and necessary. So, I decided to take a different approach. Instead of going head-to-head with Carolyn like everyone else, I let her mock me. I let her and the other HOA members call my flood wall ugly and out of place. I didn't fight back. I didn't argue. I just smiled to myself and kept working on my next big move. I spent the next week getting everything ready, timing it perfectly. The next big rainstorm was coming, and with it, the opportunity for a little payback. Carolyn had no idea what she was walking into. While she was busy sending me another letter about my unsightly flood wall, I was preparing a little surprise of my own. I knew that wall, ugly as it might have seemed to her, was solid enough to protect my property. But I also knew it had an extra little feature, one that could potentially save the entire neighborhood. The rainstorm arrived sooner than expected, and with it came the flood warnings. My wall stood firm, keeping the waters at bay. But what Carolyn didn't know was that I had planned it so that, should the rain come down too hard, the wall would do more than just stop the water. It would redirect it straight into the areas that needed it most. Carolyn's precious neighborhood, where all the flooded properties were. As the flood waters rose, Carolyn found herself calling everyone she could think of, trying to save the homes that were now being threatened by the very thing she had mocked just days before. It wasn't long before the first responders arrived, their sirens echoing down the road. They came to the wrong place. They thought they were here to help me, but the real trouble was right in front of them. Carolyn and her HOA friends were out there, begging for help, trying to figure out how to save their homes. The very homes they had laughed at me for trying to protect. They were about to get a lesson in humility. I stood back, watching it all unfold. I had kept my word. My wall was never just an eyesore, it was a lifeline. And now Carolyn had to swallow her pride, and maybe even learn a thing or two about what it meant to truly take care of a community. I didn't need to say anything. The look on her face was all the apology I needed. The rain had started slowly at first, like a soft tap on the roof, but soon it grew heavier, the kind of downpour that made you feel like you were trapped inside a bucket. I stood at the window, watching the storm roll in across my property, the sound of the rain slamming against the walls. The flood wall, that ugly barrier that Carolyn and her HOA buddies had mocked just days ago, was doing its job. The water was rising, but it wasn't reaching my land. It was stopping right at the edge, like I had planned. I didn't need to look out the window to know Carolyn's perfect neighborhood was in trouble. The storm was just the start. My phone buzzed, and I saw her name flashing on the screen. Carolyn. It wasn't surprising. She'd been calling every other minute since the storm started, trying to get updates. I ignored it, but I knew what she was thinking. She was watching her pristine cul-de-sac slowly turn into a river. She had no idea that the wall she'd so easily dismissed was the very thing saving the homes around us. It was a beautiful twist of fate. Carolyn and her HOA had never taken me seriously, but now, in the middle of a downpour, they had no choice but to face the reality. My phone buzzed again. This time, I answered. "John, this is Carolyn," she almost screamed. I could barely hear her over the sound of her panic. "Please, the water is rising, and our homes." "I know," I said calmly. "It's going to be okay. Just stay where you are. I've got everything under control." There was a pause on the other end. I could hear her taking shallow breaths. "What do you mean under control?" "Your flood wall. It's doing its job." I cut her off. I could hear her breathing get heavier, the reality sinking in. She hadn't thought that wall was worth a second glance. But now, with the rain pounding down, it was the only thing keeping the flood at bay. I knew she wouldn't like admitting it, but she had no other choice. "You have to help us, John," she pleaded. "We need your wall. The flood is heading our way. Our properties are—" "I'm afraid it's too late for that," I said, letting the silence hang between us. I could almost hear her floundering, scrambling for control. "But there's something you can do," I added, leaning against the doorframe, watching the rain fall like a curtain over the neighborhood. "What?" Her voice was desperate now. "What can we do? We can't fix this on our own. You can start by admitting that my flood wall isn't as ugly as you thought," I said, letting a small smile creep onto my face. "And maybe, just maybe, stop calling it an eyesore every chance you get." There was a long silence, and for a moment, I wondered if she would hang up on me. But then she spoke, her voice low, barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, John. I didn't realize. I didn't know it would be this bad." It felt good to hear those words, even if they were wrapped in desperation. "It's fine," I said, keeping my voice steady. "But you've got to understand, Carolyn, sometimes the things we overlook are the very things that save us. I built that wall to protect my property, but it's protecting all of us now." I paused for a moment, listening to the sound of rain pelting against the roof. "You're lucky I built it, because if I hadn't, we'd all be underwater right now. I'd say that's worth a little respect." I could hear her scrambling for words. "You're right, John. We'll do what we can to help. Just please, let us know if there's anything we can do to make things right." I nodded, though I knew she couldn't see me. "Just remember this the next time you try to judge someone's hard work. The wall might not look pretty to you, but it works. And that's all that matters." I hung up the phone before she could say anything else. As the storm continued, I stood there, feeling a strange satisfaction. The flood wall wasn't just a physical barrier, it was a lesson that would echo in the neighborhood for a long time. The water was still rising, but as long as my wall held, we were safe. And Carolyn, well, she had a lot to think about. The storm had passed, but the damage was still evident. The once pristine streets of Willowbrook Estates were now covered in mud, debris, and the remnants of a flood that had threatened to overtake the entire neighborhood. My flood wall had done its job, but the aftereffects of the storm were still lingering, and so was Carolyn. The next morning, as I sipped my coffee, I saw her walking down the driveway. She was no longer the confident, condescending HOA president. She was a woman who had just realized how wrong she had been. She knocked on my door, her usual confidence replaced with something else, vulnerability. "John," she started, "can we talk?" I raised an eyebrow but nodded, stepping aside to let her in. She hesitated for a moment, looking around at my modest home, probably still comparing it to the mansions around the corner. "I wanted to apologize," she said, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "I didn't understand what you were doing with that wall. I thought it was just an eyesore, something that didn't belong in our neighborhood." I leaned back, studying her carefully. "It's all right," I said after a beat. "Most people wouldn't understand unless they had to deal with a flood. You're not the first to mock it, and I'm sure you won't be the last." She shifted uncomfortably. "I've been so caught up in what's pretty and what fits into the neighborhood standards that I didn't stop to think about the real purpose behind it. I've been so focused on appearances. I didn't see the bigger picture." I nodded, sipping my coffee slowly. "It's easy to get caught up in that stuff," I said, "especially when you have power and think everything should fit into a neat little box. But nature? Nature doesn't care about boxes. It'll do what it wants." She nodded, her gaze dropping to the floor for a moment before looking back up at me. "You were right," she admitted. "I made a mistake, and I should have supported you instead of criticizing you. You were trying to protect your property, your family, and the whole neighborhood." The words stung, but they also carried an unexpected weight. It wasn't every day that someone like Carolyn admitted she was wrong, especially not to someone like me. It's all right, I repeated. But next time, maybe take a second to think about the bigger picture before you judge someone's hard work. This isn't just about a wall. It's about understanding that not everything is as it seems. Sometimes, the things we overlook are the things that save us. She nodded again, this time more resolutely. I get it now. I'll make sure to take your concerns more seriously from now on. I won't stand in the way of your hard work, and I'll work with the HOA to make sure something like this doesn't happen again. For a moment, I thought she might offer some grand gesture of goodwill, but instead, she just stood there. I don't need anything from you, Carolyn, I said, finishing my coffee and standing up. Just make sure you remember this the next time you start enforcing a rule that doesn't make sense. She gave a small, embarrassed smile. I will. Thank you, John. As she turned to leave, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. Carolyn had learned a valuable lesson, one she would probably never forget. The floodwaters had receded, but the storm that had passed through our little neighborhood had left its mark, not on the houses, but on the people. I watched her walk back to her car, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just a resident of Willowbrook Estates. I was a part of it, standing up for what was right, even when no one else could see it. Carolyn and the rest of the HOA would remember this day, and I'd make sure that the lessons learned from it would echo through Willowbrook for a long time. I went back inside, feeling oddly at peace. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But for now, it felt like home. The days following the storm were a strange mix of calm and reflection. The floodwaters had receded, leaving behind a neighborhood that, for all its beauty, was now forever changed. Carolyn had done what she said she would. She brought the HOA to the table and made sure they would no longer overlook what I had done. But something in me told me that change in Willowbrook Estates wasn't going to be so simple. Carolyn was doing her best to make amends, but the power she wielded as HOA president couldn't be erased by a few apologies and a couple of shared meetings. It was a cold morning when I heard the knock again. This time, I wasn't surprised. I had a feeling Carolyn wouldn't just let things go. But when I opened the door, it wasn't just Carolyn standing there. She had a small group with her, 3 other members of the HOA, all standing there with serious expressions. Carolyn stepped forward, her eyes meeting mine. John, we've been discussing something, she began. We want to make it right. We understand now that your flood wall isn't just a simple construction. It's a protection, a defense for all of us. We've decided to support you, and the HOA will no longer oppose your property improvements. I raised an eyebrow, unsure where this was headed. It seemed like a big step, but something felt off. That's good to hear, Carolyn, I said, keeping my voice neutral. But I'm curious, what's the catch? The other members shifted uncomfortably, but Carolyn just smiled. No catch, she said quickly. We've decided it's time to look at things differently. We want Willowbrook to be a place where people can build what they need without constantly being bogged down by outdated rules. We've talked to the city council, and we're pushing for changes. I nodded, still trying to process. Changes? I repeated, still cautious. What kind of changes? Carolyn looked to the others, who nodded in agreement before speaking again. We're going to update the HOA guidelines, one of them said. Things like flood prevention and property safety. Those kinds of improvements will no longer be seen as eyesores. We'll make sure the community understands their importance. Another member chimed in. We'll also be more transparent about how we handle these situations. We're going to involve residents more in decisions. I paused, considering their words. It was a lot to take in. It wasn't every day that an entire HOA suddenly shifted gears like this, but there was something in the air, an unfamiliar openness. So, you're telling me that all those fines, all that pressure on people to follow rules that didn't make sense, that's going to stop? I asked, trying to get a clearer picture. Carolyn gave a small, genuine smile. Yes, John, we're going to be more reasonable. We realize now that being inflexible isn't helping anyone. We want Willowbrook to feel more like a community, not a dictatorship. I looked at her, searching for any sign of insincerity, but all I saw was a woman who had learned a hard lesson. And that was something I could respect. All right, I said after a long pause. I'll hold you to that. Carolyn nodded. You have my word. As they left, I couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. It wasn't just about the flood wall anymore. It was about something bigger, A community that had learned the value of flexibility, of listening, of understanding. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I returned to my work, feeling the weight of the storm that had passed. It had taken more than just the floodwaters to change Willowbrook Estates. It had taken an entire neighborhood being forced to reconsider their priorities. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, things were going to be all right. The rain had stopped, but the changes were just beginning. It had been weeks since the flood, and the changes in Willowbrook Estates were starting to settle in. Carolyn and the other HOA members had kept their word, and the atmosphere around the neighborhood was different. People were more open, more willing to talk, and less concerned about petty rules. I could see the shift in how things were done. It wasn't a dramatic change overnight, but the seeds were planted and things were growing. As for me, life had returned to a quieter pace. The threat of the flood was gone, and my flood wall, the one that had started it all, stood as a reminder of what could happen when you think outside the box. I had even gotten a few nods of respect from neighbors who once looked at me like I was the odd one out. One afternoon, I was outside, cleaning up my yard when Carolyn pulled up in her car. She rolled down the window, her face warm with the kind of genuine smile I hadn't seen before. "John," she called, "got a minute?" I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked over to the car. "What's up?" I asked, a little curious. "I wanted to thank you again," she said, her tone softer than I expected. "I know it took a storm for us to get here, but I think you've done more for this neighborhood than anyone else in a long time. People are talking. They're really starting to understand what community means." I raised an eyebrow, not used to this kind of praise. "That's a nice change from the usual." "Criticism," I said with a small smile. She chuckled, but it wasn't the usual forced laugh. There was something sincere in it now. "Yeah," she said, "we've been talking about how to keep this going. We've realized that it's not about the perfect lawn or the right kind of mailbox. It's about protecting each other and doing what's necessary to keep this place safe." I nodded. "That's what I've been saying all along. It's not about looking good. It's about making sure we're all taken care of, especially when the unexpected happens." Carolyn's eyes softened. "I know I didn't get it before, and I'm sorry for that. But I see it now. It's not just your flood wall that's important. It's the idea behind it. That kind of thinking could save us all." I could tell she was being genuine, and I appreciated that. We had come a long way from the days when she would send letters about how my property was bringing down the neighborhood. "So what's next?" I asked, curious about how far the changes would go. "Well," Carolyn said, glancing down at the steering wheel, "we've been in talks with the city about getting more community-based programs going. Things that focus on resilience, like emergency preparedness workshops, and maybe even some home improvements for people who need them. It's time we stopped seeing the neighborhood as a collection of houses and started seeing it as a community." I was impressed. This was more than I had expected. A few months ago, I never would have guessed Carolyn and the others would be talking about things like community workshops and emergency preparedness. "That sounds like a step in the right direction," I said, nodding. "I'm glad to see it." Carolyn smiled again, this time with a sense of pride. "It's all thanks to you," she said. "And I promise, we'll keep pushing for these changes. We've learned the hard way, but I think we're finally starting to get it." She started to roll up the window, but then paused. "Oh, and John. Yeah. You're not the outsider anymore. You're part of this community. I just wanted you to know that." I didn't say anything right away. It was a simple statement, but it meant more than any of the apologies or official meetings we'd had. It was a genuine recognition of something that, until recently, felt like it would never happen. Carolyn drove off, and I stood there for a moment, letting her words sink in. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But things were better. We had come together, not through rules and restrictions, but through understanding and cooperation. It wasn't just my flood wall that had made a difference. It was the shift in how people thought, how they looked out for each other. The rain had come, the floodwaters had risen, and yet, here we were, still standing, still a community. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't just surviving here. I was thriving. It was another quiet evening in Willowbrook Estates. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the neighborhood. I had just finished putting in a few hours of work in the garden when I saw Carolyn walking down the street again. She had her usual confident stride, but there was something different about the way she was carrying herself now. Gone was the overbearing attitude I had come to expect from her in the past. This time, She looked more like a neighbor than an HOA president. She waved as she approached, and I waved back, setting down my tools. "Hey, John." She greeted me with a friendly smile. "Got a minute?" "Of course," I replied, wiping my hands on a rag. "What's on your mind?" She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I wanted to tell you something. It's been a few weeks since we last talked, and I've been thinking about everything we've discussed. The changes in the neighborhood, the way things are evolving. It's not just about the flood wall anymore. It's about the way we approach things as a community." I raised an eyebrow, a little surprised. "I'm listening." She took a deep breath before continuing. "I was wrong about a lot of things. I'll admit that. But it wasn't just about the flood wall. It was about my own attitude toward people and how I've been enforcing rules without thinking about the bigger picture. I've spent so much time trying to maintain a perfect neighborhood that I've forgotten what really matters: the people who live here." I couldn't help but feel a little proud of how far things had come. Carolyn wasn't just apologizing anymore. She was really understanding. "Sounds like a big shift," I said. "I'm glad to hear it." She nodded. "Yeah, it is. And I know we can't fix everything overnight, but I'm working on making sure we keep this momentum going. The new guidelines we're pushing are just the start. We're planning on creating a neighborhood committee, a group of residents who can share their ideas and concerns. That way, we can all work together instead of just relying on the HOA board to make all the decisions." I smiled at the thought. Now that's a real change. A real community effort, not just top-down rules. Carolyn's eyes lit up at my response. "Exactly. I want everyone to feel like they have a voice, not just the people in charge. You were right all along, John. The HOA isn't just about controlling things. It's about listening and protecting what matters." I nodded slowly, appreciating her newfound perspective. That's exactly the kind of change Willowbrook needs. People want to feel like they belong, not like they're being policed every minute of the day. She smiled, a genuine warmth in her expression. "That's the goal. And honestly, I couldn't have made these changes without you showing me what's important. You've been a real catalyst for all of this, whether you realize it or not." I laughed, shaking my head. "I just did what I thought was right." She stepped a little closer, her tone becoming more sincere. "And that's what makes all the difference. You showed us that doing what's right doesn't always look like the way things have always been done. It's about thinking outside the box, about protecting what really matters. That's what makes you a real part of this community now." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For the first time, I truly felt like I wasn't just some outsider. I was a part of something, a real community. Carolyn, for all her past mistakes, had finally come around. The neighborhood was different now, but it wasn't just because of the flood wall. It was because people were starting to understand each other, to see beyond the surface. We stood there, for a few moments in comfortable silence, watching the last rays of sunlight fade. "You know," Carolyn said finally, breaking the quiet, "I think we've still got a lot to work on, but I have a good feeling about where things are headed. It's going to be a long road, but I think we're on the right track." I smiled, the weight of everything that had happened finally sinking in. "I think you're right." As Carolyn turned to leave, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. Willowbrook Estates wasn't perfect, it never would be. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like home. Real progress was being made, and I had a feeling the best was yet to come. It had been a few months since the flood, and the neighborhood was starting to look a little different. Willowbrook Estates had a fresh energy, a sense of unity I hadn't felt before. People were starting to take ownership of their homes and their community in a way that went beyond just following the rules. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was the kind of place where I finally felt like I belonged. One afternoon, I was sitting out on the porch, sipping my coffee, when Carolyn pulled up again. This time, she wasn't alone. She had a few members from the HOA with her. I watched as they made their way up the driveway. But this time, there was no tension. No hint of forced politeness. Just people coming together. "John, got a minute?" Carolyn called out as she reached the porch. I stood up and met them halfway. "Sure. What's up?" She gave me a smile, and for once, it didn't feel like it was a smile of obligation. "We've been talking," she started, "and we want to do something special for the neighborhood. You've done so much for us already, and now we want to show you how much we appreciate it." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you have in mind?" Carolyn glanced at the others, who nodded in agreement. "We've been working on a project. A community garden," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "A place where everyone can come together, share resources, and really start connecting. We want you to be a part of it." The idea hit me like a wave. A community garden. It was simple, but it was the kind of thing that could make a real difference. It would be a space for everyone, a way to build something tangible together. I could see it now. People working side by side, planting and growing not just vegetables, but relationships. "I'd love to be a part of it," I said, feeling a sense of pride I hadn't expected. "This is exactly what this place needs." Carolyn smiled, her eyes bright. "We thought you'd say that. You've been such an inspiration to us. The way you've handled everything. Your wall, the way you've stood up for what's right. It's really made us rethink how we approach things." I shook my head, a little overwhelmed. I was just doing what I thought was best. But this garden idea? This is what Willowbrook really needs. The HOA members around Carolyn nodded, and for the first time, I saw them not just as enforcers of rules, but as people who genuinely cared about the future of the community. We spent the next hour walking through the plans, picking out the perfect spot for the garden, and deciding how best to bring it to life. It wasn't just about planting vegetables. It was about planting a new way of thinking, a new sense of belonging. As we wrapped up, Carolyn clapped me on the back. "We're going to make this happen, John. Together." I smiled, feeling like I was finally part of something bigger than myself. That night, as I sat on my porch watching the sun set over the neighborhood, I couldn't help but think about how far we had come. A few months ago, this place felt like a battlefield. Now it felt like home. The flood had been a turning point, but it wasn't just the storm that had changed us. It was what we had done afterward, the way we had come together, learned from each other, and started rebuilding from the ground up. The community garden wasn't just a project. It was a symbol of everything we had learned. Willowbrook Estates was no longer a place where people lived side by side, just following the rules. It was a place where people worked together, where everyone had a stake in the future. And for the first time, I felt like the flood wall wasn't just a physical structure. It was a metaphor for the walls we had, broken down between us. Walls of misunderstanding, fear, and judgment. The storm had brought us together, and the real work was just beginning. It was a Saturday morning when the first shovel hit the ground. The community garden project had officially begun, and the excitement in Willowbrook Estates was palpable. What had started as a simple idea had grown into something much more, a symbol of change, a testament to the way things had shifted. People of all ages gathered in the designated area, ready to put in their time and effort. I stood back for a moment, taking it all in. Carolyn and a few other members of the HOA were already organizing the volunteers, handing out gloves, and giving instructions on where to start. It was different from the usual HOA meetings. No one was arguing over rules. No one was complaining about what didn't fit the standard. This was real collaboration. I grabbed a shovel myself and walked over to join the group. "I'm glad to see you here," Carolyn said, looking up as she saw me approach. "This is more than I thought it would be." I smiled, digging into the soil. "You've got a good group of people here. It's nice to see everyone so motivated." "It's a relief," she said, brushing her hair back. "We've been talking for weeks about how we can keep this momentum going. We've already got plans for more projects, but this garden? It's just the beginning." I nodded. It's amazing how something so simple can bring everyone together. As the day went on, the garden took shape. The sun was high in the sky, and the work wasn't easy, but it was fulfilling. There was something about digging into the earth that felt grounding. It wasn't just about planting seeds in the ground. It was about planting new ideas, new ways of thinking. The conversation among the volunteers was light, filled with laughter and shared stories. People who had once been strangers were now working side by side, talking about everything from the weather to their favorite gardening tips. It felt like the neighborhood was finally becoming what it was meant to be, a community, not just a collection of houses. As the afternoon wore on, we took a break to grab some water. Carolyn sat down next to me, wiping the sweat from her brow. "I can't believe how much we've accomplished already," she said, looking at the area we had cleared. "This is what it's supposed to feel like, isn't it? This sense of real connection." "Yeah," I agreed. This is what Willowbrook was missing. It wasn't just about following the rules or keeping up appearances. It was about the people, about coming together and sharing something real. She smiled, and for a moment, I could see the weight of the past few months lifting from her shoulders. "You were right, John. We've spent so much time trying to enforce rules and maintain some sort of perfect image that we forgot what really matters. It's not about how your house looks, or if your lawn is a few inches too long. It's about the relationships we build, the trust we create. Exactly, I said. This garden is just a small part of it, but it's a big step in the right direction. Carolyn looked around at the group of volunteers, each one working hard to make the garden a reality. I never thought I'd see the day when this many people would be working together on something like this, she said. It's more than just a garden. It's a reflection of everything we've learned. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the garden, I took a step back and surveyed the work we had done. The rows of freshly dug soil, the piles of plants ready to be put in the ground. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. It was a symbol of how far we had come and how much further we could go. The neighborhood felt different now, more connected, more real. And I knew this was only the beginning. As we wrapped up for the day, Carolyn pulled me aside once more. "John, I know we've had our differences in the past," she said quietly, "but I want you to know that I truly appreciate everything you've done for this neighborhood. You've shown us what it means to care about more than just the surface." I shook my head, feeling a mix of gratitude and pride. "I just did what anyone would have done," I said. "I just wanted to see this place be what it could be." Carolyn nodded. "Well, it's becoming that, thanks to you. I think we're finally on the right track." I looked out over the garden, now full of life and potential. "Yeah," I said, "I think we are." As the night settled in and the lights of the neighborhood flickered on, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. Willowbrook wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But it was finally real, and that was enough for me. Months passed, and Willowbrook Estates continued to transform in ways I hadn't imagined. The community garden flourished, and so did the relationships among the people who lived here. What started as a simple project had become something far more meaningful. It wasn't just about growing food, it was about growing together. Neighbors who once barely spoke now found themselves chatting while pulling weeds or sharing gardening tips. The garden had given us a space to connect in a way that nothing else could. Carolyn, once the source of so many headaches, had truly come around. It wasn't just the HOA rules that had changed, it was her. She was different now, more open, more willing to listen. The shift in her wasn't lost on anyone. People started to trust her, and with that trust came a sense of community that hadn't been there before. One afternoon, as I was finishing up some work in the garden, Carolyn approached again. This time, there was no business to discuss, no project on the table. She simply wanted to talk. "I've been thinking," she said, sitting down beside me on the garden bench, "about how much things have changed." I looked up from my work, brushing the dirt off my hands. "Yeah, a lot's changed. You've definitely been part of that change." She smiled, but there was a tinge of uncertainty in her eyes. "It's not just about the projects or the garden," she said. "It's about everything we've learned. About how to work together, how to listen, and how to really care about the people around us." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "I think the flood wall did more than just protect us from water," I said. "It showed us what we're capable of when we stop focusing on the little things and start caring about the bigger picture." Carolyn looked out over the garden, where people were working and laughing together. "I never thought I'd see the day when we'd be working like this," she said softly. "I thought it was all about rules and appearances. But now, I see how much more there is to it." "It's funny," I said, "how something as simple as a garden can change everything. People just needed a reason to connect, to realize that they're not just neighbors, they're a community." She turned to me, her face more serious now. "I owe you an apology," she said. "For everything. For not seeing it before, for not listening. You were right all along, and I should have trusted you sooner." I shook my head, not wanting her to feel like she had to apologize. "We're all learning, Carolyn," I said, "and it's never too late to change." She nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. "I know, and I'm going to make sure we keep moving forward. I don't want Willowbrook to ever go back to the way it was. I want it to be a place where people feel safe, valued, and, most importantly, connected." I smiled. "That's the spirit. We're all in this together now." Carolyn stood up, brushing the dirt off her pants. "We really are," she said, her voice filled with a new sense of purpose. "And this is just the beginning. We've got a lot more work to do, but I'm ready." I watched her walk back toward the other volunteers, feeling a sense of pride in what we had all accomplished. Willowbrook wasn't perfect, but it was ours. It was a community, and it was only going to get stronger. The garden had grown, and so had we. We had learned to care for each other, to work together, and to value what truly mattered. The storm had come and gone, but what it left behind was far more important than any flood. It left us with a sense of belonging, and that was something we would carry with us forever. As the sun began to set over the garden, I realized that this was more than just a neighborhood. It was a place where people were willing to grow, not just plants, but themselves. And as I looked around at the faces of my neighbors, I knew we were all part of something bigger than any one of us. Something that would last long after the seasons changed.